Hidden Object Guru here with some games I sampled recently. As always, the score is out of 10, based on how interested I am in playing more of them in the future. Forever Pool. A pool simulator lives or dies on the realism of the physics. If the motion of the balls around the table doesn't feel accurate, you don't have a game. Forever Pool has its problems. Movement around the world is awkward, and repositioning hands on the cue is a chore. But the mechanics are rock solid, and as a result, it's a satisfying experience. The game anticipates the essential wonkiness of VR controls, and so rather than hoping that the Quest 2 can perfectly track its controllers, the game gives players a lock-on button, as if this were a standard console pool game. They can take as long as they want to line up a shot, and then press the lock-on button so that all they have to worry about is the amount of power they want to put in. An optional aiming line even lets players know where the ball will go through the first bounce. It's a little clunky, sure, but it's the best VR pool I've played yet. 7 out of 10. Faster Dead VR. This should be just my kind of game. Driving a super truck around a post-apocalyptic wasteland, blasting zombies with a roof-mounted turret. Unfortunately, the camera is a complete disaster, and it keeps the game from functioning at all. The game constantly takes control of the camera away from the player, which doesn't just make aiming and shooting nearly impossible, but could also easily trigger motion sickness in a player. The menu is also trash, as it constantly moves with the player's head, rather than staying in place and letting the player look around where they want. Add in a player-controlled camera, and this could be interesting. But as it now stands, I can't risk playing it. 2 out of 10. Villain's Legacy. This erotic visual novel puts the player in the role of a would-be supervillain taking on an assortment of dangerous, arrogant, self-involved superheroes. So essentially, an even more pornographic version of The Boys. Only, weirdly not as mean-spirited? You'd think, based on the fact that the main character's motivation for becoming a supervillain is that he's repeatedly sexually humiliated by superheroes, that returning the favor would be at the forefront of his mind. But no, the game is far more concerned with raising questions of what damage is done by ultra-powerful people who don't give a thought to anything other than their own popularity and maintaining their position of authority. There's even a few genuinely good comedic moments, mostly involving a pair of henchwomen who spend more time bickering than doing their jobs. And of course, there's a bunch of sex scenes, because it's that type of game. One note though, the game is still in early access, so it's likely that it doesn't have an ending just yet. I would recommend waiting until it's finished if that's important to you. 7 out of 10. Air Attack VR. It's from the same developers as Faster Dead VR, so I wasn't expecting anything great. And the completely garbage menus are still a problem, but this game has the camera well under control, which at least means I was able to get through a few levels without it making me queasy. It's a fairly basic experience. Fly around some islands, do some dogfighting, but it's functional. And it makes a strong argument that almost any game is improved as an experience by being in VR. There's a couple of weird hitches. Checkpoints don't appear on screen, so the player has to constantly check a map by looking at the side of the screen. And it's not index touch compatible, so I had to play it with a standard controller. Overall though, it's a completely playable, if extremely basic, arcade dogfighting game. 3 out of 10. RAV. Asteroids. It's Asteroids in VR, what more can you say? Actually, there's one thing, and it's pretty interesting. Because it's VR and there's no screen for the players to fly off of, the playfield has been moved to a hollow, transparent sphere that the player sticks to the surface of. So instead of the asteroids just teleporting in at the start of the level, they fly out from the middle of the sphere, then start moving around the surface when they get to it. The player can fly around the back of the sphere while remaining visible, which adds an interesting twist that I hadn't seen in the genre before. It's still just asteroids, of course, but it's a pretty great version of it. 6 out of 10. Space Shells. Randomized VR robot shooting on derelict spacecraft? There's a premise that's easy to love. And it doesn't hurt that the gameplay is tight as heck. The player picks a robot type to load their consciousness into, 3D prints some weapons, and then picks a ship to invade. There's a couple of interesting complications that take this from being just another VR shooter and move it to a higher level. Each robot frame has a maximum energy limit that drains every time they make any kind of movement. This forces a direct playstyle, with the player rushing from one encounter to the next. In addition to this, guns cannot be reloaded, so the player has to not only aim well, but also constantly grab the guns off of fallen foes. The result is quick, compelling action with only one drawback that I encountered. The game uses the index controller's grip as a button to be clicked to pick up or put down weapons, rather than just letting the player naturally hold and release. Just moving hands around naturally can easily lead to the kind of twitches that the controller interprets as a click, leading to weapons being dropped at inopportune times. So until they give the game an update, I'm going to have to give it a split score. With Vive controllers that have grip buttons, 8 out of 10. With Index's grip sensors, 6 out of 10. eSpire 2 VR. Tripwire Interactive's eSpire did something amazing. It put players inside Metal Gear Solid 2. Yes, the plot was its own thing, involving a pilot mentally projected into a robot drone body to go on sneaking missions. But the mechanics, in which players move slowly through military facilities, knocking out guards and sabotaging weapons of mass destruction, is pure MGS2. It's basically my catchphrase at this point that everything is better in VR. But eSpire makes an incredibly strong case for tactical stealth action moving into virtual spaces. Every mechanic that players would expect has been modified to function perfectly in VR. Radar has been replaced by the ability to see through walls and tag enemies. First-person zoom is a screen that comes up on the player's arm when aiming weapons, and there's even a voice recognition so that players can interrogate held-up enemies. It's been over 20 years since Big Shell, and the way this series lets players live out that kind of methodical, skill-focused stealth action in VR is a dream come true. Maybe Tripwire can team up with Konami to do this for real with Metal Gear Solid 1-3. 9 out of 10. Moto Trophy VR. And here's the third game from the developers of Air Attack and Faster Dead VR. It's the best of the three. The camera is the most stable I've seen, the controls function well enough, and the menus are completely navigable. Now, it's not a great game. The driving action is sluggish and awkward, the bonuses pop up on the track so late that they're weirdly difficult to swerve into, and the frame rate has some incredibly bad stuttering. That said, each successive game has improved on the last, so if the developers can continue to tweak their formula, we should get something good from them pretty soon. Also, the game has one of the most entertaining pauses I've ever encountered in a racing title. Instead of simply pausing the action, when the player presses pause, all of the bikes come to an instant full stop, and when the player unpauses, they all have to accelerate to get back up to speed. It's charmingly strange. 4 out of 10. That's it for this week. As always, I've been the Hidden Object Guru. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or suggestions for games I should check out, drop them in the comments section below the video. I'll see you back here when I've had time to play some more games, but until then, I'll say that's right. Au revoir.